At a celebration of China's 4 decades of reform and opening up, Chinese President Xi Jinping told his audience that the Communist Party of China is central to the country's future and that the world needs China for global prosperity. What can we read into his speech? And on International Migrants Day, I'll be asking why immigration is still such a contentious issue around the world. Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. Openness brings progress, while seclusion leads to backwardness, so said Chinese President Xi Jinping on Tuesday when he addressed a gathering in Beijing to mark 40 years of China's reform and opening up. In his speech, President Xi underlined China's commitment to opening up wider to the world, adding that China cannot develop itself in isolation from the world and the world needs China for global prosperity. He also highlighted the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party as the most essential attribute of socialism with Chinese characteristics and the great strength of the country's political system. He also stressed that no one is in a position to dictate to the Chinese people what should or should not be done. So how has the Chinese leadership summarized the factors behind China's success so far, and what will this leadership do to create an even bigger miracle against domestic and international headwinds? Joining me in the studio are Martin Jacques, the author of When China Rules the World, and Wang Huiyao, president of the Center for China and Globalization, a think tank. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Well, before we understand the premise of President Xi's speech, I think it is important to explain to us the occasion of this meeting, which happened earlier today, right? Professor Wang, what was the meeting all about? Was it to outline future policies? Was it to summarize what happened in the past? What was going on?
Yes, I was in a meeting today, actually. It's a great gathering and celebrating 40th years anniversary of China's opening up and reform. And I think that it's also very, well organized, and we had actually awarded about 100 outstanding, remarkable contribution made by the Chinese celebrities in different fields, and also awarded 10 international elite that actually contribute to the opening up of the outside world. And I think the message is really clear, is that President Xi actually summarized where did the opening up and reform concept originally come from. It was after the Cultural Revolution, after the a lot of reflection, a lot of summarize, and a lot of forward-looking. So I think he gave a very systematic look at all the development factors, and also so important that China should keep its the miracle that they had actually in the past 4 decades. And also he will emphasize this is a pollute, and maybe the high climate is still down the road, and we should put all our efforts, we should really continue to open up, and we should really make more stability and contribute prosperity for the world.
So as what we should do to look back over the past 40 years, exactly what have we achieved, why we have achieved it, and whether we're going to continue down the same road. Dr. Jacques, what is your take, your first impression of the speech, of the tone of the speech?
Well, it's a very strong statement of the whole period, starting with the 40th, starting in 1978 with the reform and opening up, and the way in which China has built on that subsequently, and completely transformed the nation, and in the process transformed the world.
You said the beginning bit was interesting. Why was it interesting to you?
Well, I think that these kind of anniversaries remind you of what happened at a key moment, and so we explore it in a way that in normal life we take for granted. 40 years ago we don't think about it, and I think it shows you the usefulness actually of anniversaries, because it reminds everyone just how it started and what's been achieved since. And I enjoyed the quotes he gave from Deng Xiaoping and so on, and reminded just of what a difficult moment it was for China at the end of the 1970s. After the death of Mao, the economy in a mess, no real sense of direction, China doing badly compared with its neighbours by and large, and so on.
Well, I was asking this question because on the Western media, headlines have been that, for instance, on this TV report by Western media, it says that President Xi promises miracles, but he delivered little specifics, that he was short on substance, so he didn't give out any concrete policies to plans as to how to shore China up in terms of difficulty that we're faced at this moment. Was this speech set out to outline any policies in terms of reform and opening up, and is it more important than the general direction we are looking at?
No, I think this is absolutely very important. You know, first of all, people in the past were saying, will there be a celebration for the 40th anniversary? Would opening will continue? Now we had this grand opening and the stressed opening up. I think it's very ceremonial. It was really praised the people who have made outstanding from both China and from overseas, and also it was really a cheer up moment for China to, as Martin said, it was a fresh up, the memory. I know President Xi also talked about, you know, they were using coupons, they buy this and that, and then, you know, how we started from 40 years ago to now as a second largest economy. So this review of the process, I think, is more important. Also, going through this kind of you know, memory and process and summarizing. But I think that for the concrete policy, you know, we have a lot of it already. We had the Boao Forum, we had the Shanghai Expo, and actually subsequently, starting from tomorrow, there's a Central Economic Working Conference will come in. I think those will probably dealing with more concrete measures and policies. But this is a strong message of sending to China, and domestic and internationally, China will continue to open up. China is going to continue to uphold Deng Xiaoping and you know, those opening up policies. So that's really the important message.
Another adjective that caught my attention in the Western report is that Xi appeared defiant, that he was sending very strong messages in terms of China sticking to its own path. You know, other people, please don't tell us, don't dictate to us where to go, where not to go. So what do you make of this adjective, defiant? Does China, as a Chinese leader of 1.4 billion people, does China not have the right to say, this is what we're going to do? What is wrong with that?
Well, I think you can only understand Western commentary through the prism of the way the West looks at things. And I would like to strongly emphasize the fact that actually the West has shown precious little interest in the 40th anniversary of reform and opening up. What does that mean? It means the vast majority of people are completely ignorant of what this event was and what it led to. So the historical significance of it, which in my view, 1978 is arguably the most important date, or one of the most important dates of the 20th century, because it actually opened up the 21st century. Now, the West just can't look at it like that, because it doesn't follow Chinese history in that kind of way, and it's, to be honest with you, it's reluctant to really accept China's rise in the way that it's taking place, because in some degree or other it feels threatened or fearful or concerned about it. And I don't think, I think that it would have been completely inappropriate to, it wasn't about policies, it was about an historical landmark and where China's come, you know, from then to now. And of course for the Chinese, a sense of history is very precious to them. That is how China thinks.
What is the consequence, the potential, what are the potential consequences for the West still not taking a due interest to what China is doing, to what China has done, to what China is about to do?
I think they're potentially very serious, because, you know, we're living at a moment where it looks as if the relationship between China and the United States is deteriorating, probably deteriorating quite rapidly. And the fact that people in the West don't really understand China, even in a relatively even at the end of a relatively benign period, means that in a relatively tense and conflictual period, then it's very easy to stoke prejudices, to speak to prejudices, to mobilize those kind of attitudes of fear, of the unknown, of the other, of a culture which is alien to them, of a civilization that they know very little about.
Well, some people are saying Chinese President Xi Jinping is the most powerful politician, Chinese politician, since a very long time. And actually, this piece carried by a prominent Western newspaper commented on his speech, said today that he delivered an unabashed defense of his policies.
No, I think, I agree with Martin just analyzed. I think, first of all, for the last 4 decades, China has really made a lot of contributions to the growth of the world GDP, over 1/3 of that. China for the last 40 has kept up 9 to 10% GDP growth, which is unprecedented in the human history of mankind. And also, that China has lifted 700-800 million out of poverty. So I think the world should congratulate on China has been doing that. I think we should still remember the famous slogan that Deng Xiaoping had said, if it doesn't matter it's white cat or black cat as long as it catches mice. So if this system works, let's not deny all the achievement that they have. I think, of course, we need to, looking for the future, we need to actually develop the good relations with all our neighbors and all the, have a peaceful environment. I think that's precisely President Xi also said today, that we need to build a shared future with the mankind. China will continue to open up. China will open up wider, and then they will stick to the opening up line. So it's a strong commitment for the party and top leaders from China that the opening up and reform will be the next main theme for the next 4 decades. So that's really the message. I think the key message we should get is that we are not steering away from the opening up. That has been emphasized again and again today.
Yeah, basically he was outlining 9 musts in the beginning of his speech, and the top on the list is CPC's leadership, but that leadership is committed to reform and opening up, right? He didn't say anything else that we should stop doing. But he was also very clear in his messages. For instance, he said that no one is in a position to dictate to the Chinese people what should and should not be done, as I said in the beginning. Dr. Jacques, how do you look at the kind of tone that's been expressed here? Is it arrogance, is it defiance, or is it really a confidence, a sense of confidence that we have done the right thing for the past 40 years? Why can't we continue making our own choices?
Well, listening to that myself, I immediately think this is obviously a phrase which is geared to the present moment and to the relations with the United States and the demands being made of China in terms of closing the trade deficit and abandoning Made in China 2025 and subsidizing key strategic industries and so on. And I think that in this moment he also speaks powerfully to the Chinese of a very important Chinese tradition, which is, we've been messed around historically so much by the West and Japan that we are now strong enough to be able not to give in, to do what we think is needed for the Chinese people and to do what we think is needed for the world.
Yeah, well, I think people should also read the other messages he was sending. For instance, he said that China will never pursue development at the cost of others' interests, nor will China ever give up its own legitimate rights and interests. China pursues a national defense policy that is defensive in nature, and China's development poses no threat to any country. No matter what stage of development it reaches, China will never seek hegemony. Professor Wang, what do you think, looking globally at all of these, segments of information, what is President Xi trying to say? Are we going to be strong and confident and just, crush whoever is on our way, or being aware of the other people's rights and interests as we go along?
I think that's right, because I think the President has a very confident speech today, basically, and you can feel that from the presence I was in. But on the other hand, he really stressed that even though China is developed, even though China may have another miracle, but China will not seek hegemony, China will not bully the others. That's also a strong message President Xi is sending, that China will really put its house in order, have a domestic care taken place, so that that China can continue to contribute to the world. Let's maybe have 30-50% of the GDP growth of the world, and maybe lift another remaining people out of poverty. China may have another 300 million middle class. So together we can double the size of U.S. and triple size of the EU, the middle class buyers. So I think that kind of economic development is also the mainstream. thing that he was stressing. Also talk about market playing a vital role and also a better government role to be there. So I think he covered a lot of ground there. So basically, trying to put people at ease and also give people confidence to continue. You know, China needs to develop, and also economic development is still the priority. That was the key of the opening up and reform 40 years ago. That's still the key of priority of today for the next 40 years.
Yeah. Another very interesting paragraph that was highlighted by many people who were watching this speech very closely was his very clear message that whatever should be reformed, should be changed, or can be changed, will be changed, but whatever shouldn't be changed and cannot be changed will not be changed. Dr. Jacques, how do you read that?
Well, I think that what he's saying is that we're going to make our own choices on the basis of what's going to work for us and what is going to be correct for the Chinese people and more widely globally. And it's saying, look, we take responsibility for our own country, for the direction of our country, for our priorities and so on, and we're not going to do basically what others would like us to do or expect us to do or require us to do. On the contrary, China's way past that position.
Mr. Wang, your take?
Yeah, no, I think the message there, I interpret that is that, of course, those working well in China, those has been functioning well, working well, produce good results, produce good benefit. The methodology and also the way of doing things should continue. Of course, you know, if those not really doing well, if those not really in line with the reform, then we'll try to get rid of that. So President Xi is sending a message saying, you know, let's keep on doing what we're doing good at and really contribute to China and the world, but also let's get rid of what's, you know, reform those that are not good for China. So I think the message is clear. It's not saying we're not going to reform, it's saying we have to continue to reform, but keep the good things that are already tried for the last 4 decades, working well. Let's continue to improve that, enhance that, and really get more good results out of that.
Yeah. Very briefly, another quote that we noticed is that President Xi said we must respect the right of people of all countries to choose their own development path, uphold international fairness and justice, advocate greater democracy in international relations, and oppose one's will on others, interfering in others' internal affairs, or the strong bullying the weak. Dr. Jacques, do you think he had some countries in mind when he was saying this?
I wonder which. Yeah, of course, it's above all talking about the United States and the way it's operated historically over a long period, but especially in the recent past, and saying we need a new democratic form of international relations where, you know, it's the great hegemon can't basically do whatever it likes, whether it's you know, invading countries or telling countries what economic policies to adopt, or extraditing, trying to extradite the citizen of another country.
Mr. Wang, does that mean that China will stand up from now on to the US's pressure, or does that mean China still wants cooperation over anything, but if the need arises, China will have to say no?
I think it's, you know, send a message that China will continue to opening up a reform, which including we're talking to all the, you know, international community. President Xi also stressed that they're going to keep the international, you know, share the future for the mankind, and also we're talking, including talking to the United States. I think that will continue. I mean, but of course, China would not abandon those which are good for China, which are prosperous for China, and also after the experiment of 40 years, that are workable in China. So that, I think, is a message sending that China needs to keep some of the good stuff, but also let's improve, let's work on the relation with the rest of the world, and improving the U.S.-China relation as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to leave it there. Martin Jacques, author of When China Rules the World, and Wang Huiyao, president of the Center for China and Globalization. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break, and when I come back, I'll be asking if the world is becoming more intolerant of migrants, and if so, what is the driving cause? Stay with us. The past 18 years, 18th of December has been the International Migrants Day, observed around the world to highlight the plights of migrants. The UN estimates the number of migrants increased from some 175 million in 2000 to over 245 million in 2015, 10% of which are below the age of 15. Now this year, the subject has been particularly prevalent in America, where thousands of Central Americans embarked on a month-long journey to reach the U.S. Mexico border, fleeing violence and poverty at home. At least 6,000 of them are reportedly gathered in the border city of Tijuana, Mexico, posing challenges for local authorities. Meanwhile, the Trump administration on Sunday reaffirmed that President Trump would allow a partial shutdown of the federal government if Congress does not provide $5 billion to build a wall along the border. If funding lapses, it will be the third government shutdown this year. So will a Democrat-led House starting next month make any difference to the situation? Why is immigration such a contentious issue in the U.S. and in Europe? Joining me from Tel Aviv is Professor Joaf Toka from the American Graduate School in Paris. Professor Toka, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, please explain to us what a compact really means when we say the UN has, countries have agreed to this compact. What kind of binding effects does it have on countries, and what kind of difference will it make to the situation?
Indeed, it is a non-binding text, and this is precisely why it's a compact and not an international treaty in the more conventional sense. Namely, it's a text which had been worked upon for years and years by specialists, by politicians, by experts in demography, by people who have experience in different parts of the world dealing with migration, with demography, and with notions of sovereignty, the way they are being interpreted in different parts of the world by countries of different political systems. And that came out into final text, which is the text indeed which has been signed in Marrakesh, Morocco, and should be ratified by the 164 nations which indeed are going along, because out of 194 UN members, about 30 of them are not, for the time being, willing to go along. But we're speaking about the great, by far, the great majority of nations on earth who are agreeing for that text, which once again is a non-binding one.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is the central premise of this compact? What does it ask UN members to do in terms of dealing with immigration? And I understand in some European capitals, for instance in Brussels, there were protesters protesting against such a document, thinking that it's putting immigrants probably over the interest of nationals in a country. What really is the case?
Indeed, you're right. You mentioned the Belgian case. You mentioned earlier the tensions around issues regarding immigration and border and walls in the American Trump context. Indeed, we find all across the Western world, on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, tensions of somehow similar nature when it comes to refugees, when it comes to asylum seekers, when it comes to economic migration, as well as migration from war zones such as the Middle East or Afghanistan or some portions of Africa. We have to separate, if you want to look at it globally, we have to separate between two major types of tensions. One of them is indeed due to the real objective situation. We're speaking about millions of individuals, millions of families who are seeking to move from one country to the other. Let it be because of war and violent situations, let it be just due to human natural ambition of living better, of getting better.
Yeah.
And then, and this is perhaps the most important element to take into consideration, all that produces a lot of internal tensions within countries, within nations, because what is at stake is along the questions of identity. Who are we asking the Belgians? Who are we asking the French? Who are we maybe asking the Americans?
Okay.
And this is why we see so much tension and so much conflictual debates around those issues.
Okay, we are just joined by Ms. Eleanor Clift from Washington, D.C. She is columnist of the Daily Beast. Ms. Clift, thank you very much for joining us. I have about 3 minutes, 2 actually, so explain really quickly what is the new UN compact on immigration has to do, if at all, with the situation in the U.S. Mexican border. Is there any guideline that is being provided to how to resolve that situation or how to look at that situation? And how is a Democrats-led House going to make any difference to the situation?
International law says that people can present themselves for asylum if they are fleeing persecution for one reason or another. And the United States has certainly respected that law until our current president, President Trump. He wants to defy many international norms and basically close the border to all incoming refugees except for a very select few. And he has refused to recognize that the demographics of the people coming into the United States through the southern border are not, they used to be mainly Mexican men of working age. They are now many families, many teenagers fleeing violence in the Central American countries. And so it has led to this spectacle of putting children in cages. One 7-year-old Guatemalan girl recently died from dehydration. And the president's approach seems to be to deny the necessary resources at the border crossing to discourage people from coming. It's not really working, and his party lost a lot of seats in the recent election, and so the incoming Democrats, they do control the House. They can't make immigration law unilaterally, but you will see some attempts to modify some of the laws and policies the president has put in place.
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Thanks, Ms. Eleanor, for joining us eventually, despite any technical difficulties. Eleanor Clift, columnist of the Daily Beast, and Professor Joab Toker from the American Graduate School in Paris. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. What have been expressed here are opinions of our guests and of myself. They don't represent the opinion of CGTN. You've got the point.